Hello, and welcome to part 8 of the Building Better Teams online series. This one is concerned with communications across teams, why this is important, and some of the ways in which you can set up norms that will really help your team connect, communicate, and innovate. As I've mentioned before, this is an adaptation of an in-person and hybrid series that IMOD hosted in early 2025. These are some of the sessions that we walked through. There is a great way to connect on these is to go onto the IMOD website and look at these other ones. I encourage you to do so. Today, we're going to talk about communications. Where we're going to start is that communication is unavoidable and personal. You can not communicate. If you're not communicating your message, people fill in the gaps. It is the basis of this crucial conversations, which is a great mechanism to start to address disagreements and have hard conversations. If you don't tell your story, others will. Humans are hardwired to tell stories. It's why storytelling is such an effective mechanism for communicating information. So if you are silent or you're not talking about something or something is quiet, people will fill in the gaps. So by not communicating, you are communicating something. So just really bear that in mind as you kind of go forward. The personal piece is that when we communicate, our content is informed. It's informed by our culture. It's informed by our biases, our emotions, our opinions. This is unavoidable. You cannot prevent that. But by knowing that, and by knowing that you are bringing a personal bias to a situation, you can learn to work with that. So you can take that into account when you end up in these situations, and you maybe need to think, okay, things are not going as I thought they would be. Why is that? Is it because of me? And that's something I can control? Or is it because of them, which I have less power to control, but I can maybe think about how I approach the situation. So some things to consider. Approach situations with the best of intentions. Assume both that you are coming at this to solve the problem and your colleagues are doing the same thing. They're not here to attack you, they are here to question your idea. And that's great because that's how you learn. Be curious. If someone's disagreeing with you, then maybe there's information you don't know. There's something you can learn. There's something that you can take forward. Really expect different perspectives. Don't go into a situation thinking, I'm completely right. Go into a situation saying, I'm floating this idea and I would love to get feedback on how we can improve it or how I'm wrong or how you approach this. So expect that and really try and aim for that. Foster participation. Encourage other people to question you. Encourage folks who maybe haven't got an opportunity to question to really kind of get in there. This gives an opportunity for you to build bridges. You can start to translate. Maybe you haven't fully fleshed out the shared vocabulary, and where there are disagreements is because of a lack of understanding of a certain thing. And always, this is kind of part of the respect and assuming good attitude. Disagree with the idea, not the person, because everybody is here to solve the same problem and everyone is here to work well. With that assumption, gives you a space to really operate more effectively. If you assume the worst of people, you might want to question whether you want to be on that team or not. Setting up a plan of how you're going to communicate will help prevent disagreements or conflicts because you might be surprised that if you're having a conversation and you assume everybody's online, but somebody isn't, you are missing out. You are missing out on their ideas. Talk about it in your team. You might assume that everybody is on Slack, but they're not. So you might not know what you don't know or what they don't know. So really talk about how are you going to communicate? What are your norms going to be? Are you a team that operates on email chains? Do you have most of your conversations on Slack channels? Do you want to have a weekly stand-up where you just sort of say, what did I do last week? What am I doing this week? What are my problems? Do you want to have an asynchronous mechanism where you have a shared folder and everyone submits reports? And so that way you don't necessarily have to meet. You can basically read it when you want. I've worked in teams where folks prefer to read at 3 in the morning, and that's great. They leave comments, and it's a fantastic way of doing it. It saves them time on meetings when time is most precious during the day. Talking about this in advance is a great way to really kind of hash through this and surface new ideas. Set some expectations. If you are going to have multiple communication methods, maybe there are ways where you're like, I need an answer in the next hour. I'm going to need to text that person or WhatsApp that person or Slack that person. If it's more of a kind of long form informing people, maybe it's email, maybe it's just sending a report. But talking about what those expectations are will help you understand. People might say, I can't respond within an hour, but at least then you know. Don't exclude someone just because they refuse to adopt a new mechanism. Be flexible. Have mechanisms in your team to bring everyone along. We touched on this in an earlier one. This can be part of your collaborative plan. Having a communication setup, talk about it. Do you want a weekly meeting? Do you need a weekly meeting? Do you want to meet once a month? Is it worth having a standing meeting, or do we only meet when we have something to talk about? Discuss what your norms are going to be and talk through what's going to work best for everybody. It'll be hard to reach something that works great for everyone, but talking through it gives you insight into how it's going to operate. Take 30 seconds, pen and paper. Think through what that would look like. Do you anticipate having any problems with trying to set up a conversation in your team to have a communications plan? Is it even just getting people to talk about it? Or do you think that will be easy, but maybe there are ways that a communication plan will trip up? So take a few seconds, pause the video, and we'll continue on the next slide. You've set up your communication plan. You know how you're going to meet. You know how you're going to connect. One of the most important things as you communicate with your team is to think about simplicity and clarity. Simplicity is hard. You're all working on very advanced technical things. So, how do you do that? Anyone can be confusing. My background is organic chemistry. If I wanted to, I can just slip into that vocabulary and use that jargon, and I will confuse people pretty quickly. And I think anyone working in graduate school in many different modes, not just graduate school, can be confusing. Where the real skill is to be understandable, is to take that and make it accessible to your collaborators. And it takes practice. One of the most common pain points and one of the most common points of disagreement and conflict is people just disappearing off down a rabbit hole where maybe only 2 or 3 people in the team of 9 or 10 understand what they're talking about. And it has a huge impact on the team in general. It erodes trust because there's this assumption that people don't know what they're talking about. There's this participation. If I'm on slide 3 and I still don't understand and people are talking about things that I don't understand in a meeting, I'm going to go off and answer my email. If they're not bringing me along, I'm not going to participate. I'm not going to be able to contribute because I don't know where you are and I don't know how you are talking about things. And the impacts on team dynamics and interpersonal trust will be significant. So really think about what it looks like to be clear, be concise, be understandable to your team. You have a lot of very smart people connected into something like IMOD. If you're not communicating well, you're having a problem bringing folks along. So how do we do that? Well, use metaphors, use pictures, use figures. If you are going to use jargon, I would encourage you not to, but I know that's very difficult in especially in technical areas. So if you are going to use it, explain it. Make sure people know what you're talking about, not just what the letters mean, but what that actually is. Typically, if you're using jargon, it's something that is so critical to the research that people have given it a shorthand shortcut because we're using it all the time. So make sure people understand what it is. Make sure not just the words, but what that actually means. Your teammates do not need to become an expert in your field. That's what you're there for. But they do need to be able to communicate with you, and you need to be able to communicate with them. The more you do that, the better they will be able to interact with you and the better collaborators they will be. We're going to refer back to this chap. We talked about it in one of the earlier sessions. If you care about being thought credible and intelligent, do not use complex language where simpler language will do. He talks about this concept of cognitive strain, and it's a really interesting concept because the harder you make it for people to understand, the harder they're thinking, and the quicker they are going to tire. If your explanations and your decks are just stacked 10 deep with jargon and technical explanations and this, that, and the other, you are going to tire people out. And they only have a finite amount of cognitive effort that they can bring to this. So putting strain on them makes it harder. You should really adopt the situation where if someone doesn't understand you, it's not on them, it's on you. You're doing a bad job at explaining that situation, and you need to think a little harder about how to explain that in a more accessible fashion. This is where the shared vocabulary comes in, and we've talked about this again in a few of the sessions before this, but it's important to note in the communications piece because this is where you can actually define this in your collaborative agreement and plan is what are we going to do to build out our shared vocabulary? You might think these three folks think that everyone's understanding them. They're talking about their field, they're happily chatting, and no one's asking them questions. But actually, they're butting up against each other because you are in a highly technical interdisciplinary space. You are lightly talking across each other. It's not just terms that from that particular field or from that jargon. There are many instances where the same word means something different, whether it's in physics, whether it's in chemistry, whether it's in organic chemistry. The same term can mean different things. And so really think hard about what it looks like to be on that in that space. And if something confuses you, put your hand up and say something because they might use a word that you're familiar with and they're familiar with, but it means something different. And if you kind of think, oh, wait, that doesn't mean what I think it means, it's on you to kind of put your hand up and maybe there is sort of an agreement where you use that term differently, or you make sure that you specify which field that you're working from or speaking about. Start a shared space. This can be a Word document. This can be a PowerPoint slide. Literally write the word out and write a description of it. Have it in your shared folder. Have a single source of truth where people can go, and maybe if they're confused halfway through a meeting, they can revisit that so that they have a clear understanding. This will be an excellent resource for you going forward as well. Having that space gives you a great way to make sure that people are coming along with you and understand what you're talking about. Not all meetings suck. I'm actually an advocate for meetings. Bad meetings suck. Meetings can be tedious, they can be unengaged, they can be unproductive. Um, I'm sure you all can think of ways in which meetings are there. We've got some tools to help with this. Just take 30 seconds. Think through what are the things that for you make a meeting bad. Now take 30 seconds and think through and write down what makes for a good meeting. Pause the video and then we'll get started on tactics that you can use to really strengthen meetings. Running an efficient meeting. Keep it short. Keep it to the point. Have a meeting when you have a reason to meet, and we'll revisit this, but standing meetings are not often that useful. If you're like, we're going to meet every week, and then you turn up and there's nothing to talk about, it's not a good use of people's time. Assign a role. Set that expectations early on that Jenny is going to be in charge of running the meetings and keeping us on agenda. They will send out the agenda set up beforehand. They will make sure that it's circulated and they will make sure that people know where it is. When the meeting starts to drift, it is absolutely okay to bring it back. You might say, okay, we This is clearly a good topic of discussion. Let's put this on the agenda for next time. We've still got three things on our list to get to, and we need to get these answers. Having someone in that role and establishing that early means that, you know, I'm not thinking, okay, do I need to bring this back on track? I'm waiting for John to say, yeah, okay, great, that's enough time on this one. We're moving on to the next thing. Having someone in charge in that, having someone lead that helps. Only one person is taking formal notes. Everyone in the meeting can be taking notes. You can be writing on a post-it, you can be adding to OneNote, you can be adding to whatever your preferred mechanism of taking notes, but there is one source of truth. And we've put an example here of a meeting minutes template there, and these are agreed to. So you take the last 10 minutes of the meeting. Again, the person in charge of the meeting says, great, it's 10 to, we've got 10 minutes. Let's walk through what we talked about. And here are the action items I noted down. That's then an opportunity for someone to say, whoa, 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 there's another action item, or I didn't agree to that, or my understanding of that task is different. If you don't go through that process, you are likely to leave a meeting and people will have different interpretations and different lists. So having one that is a sort of a merge together of everyone's notes is a great way to keep track. And that then gives you a great way to review at the start of the next meeting. Be like, yeah, this one got done. This one got done. Hey, Bill, this one didn't get done. Do you need some help? This might be a longer deadline, but it's a mechanism for really keeping track and preventing things from kind of falling through the cracks. You've seen this slide before, but everyone in a meeting assumes that the other participants know and understand what they're saying. That means both the technical stuff, but also the tasks. I might have been not paying attention for the place where somebody assigned me a task and I only get half of it. If I don't put my hand up or we don't have a review at the end of the meeting, I'm not going to be in agreement with what other people are saying. So really think about how you can be clear and how you can be explicit about who is doing what and what we're talking about. This is one of, I think, the critical things within a team. We've got a game of telephone going on here. If folks aren't paying attention and you're getting your information second or third hand, you are not getting the right information. If there is not centralized notes that have been reviewed, along with action items on who is doing what, this meeting might as well have just been a catch-up chat. Not everyone makes it to every meeting. Having a set of notes in the middle means that people can keep up. Not everyone is going to be able to give their full attention. We live in a virtual space. We have virtual meetings. We have virtual teams. And unfortunately, people are often multitasking. Folks also interpret things differently. There might have been a conversation that I've only half heard and I don't have the full context. So I don't know what the actual assignment is unless we review it and I have an opportunity to question it. Confused communication is one of the main causes of conflict. If I walk away from a meeting being like, that was great, we assigned 5 tasks, we got these done, we got that done, unless I've reviewed it with everyone in there and we have a single source of truth that is built on consensus, other people will be like, I had no idea what was going on. I don't know who's doing what. If you don't have a space for people to question that, then that's where you're going to end up in a space of conflict. Action items. There are 3 things an action item needs. A description that people agree on. So there's been questioning, we've talked about it, we understand it. A deadline. And this is not necessarily for when it should be completed. It often is. But it can just be, this is 6 months in the future, but we need to revisit it in 2 months. So you put a 2-month deadline so that it's brought back up at a meeting agenda or in other discussions. And an owner. Again, this doesn't have to be the person who completes this task. It could be someone who goes off and does a little bit of research and says, actually, it's better if Jenny finishes this off. Or just having it assigned to somebody so that they can flag it up in 2 months' time so that we're aware of it. If you leave it hanging without an owner or without a deadline, it will disappear. These should be recorded and tracked in a centralized location that everyone can access. It cannot be in a team when you're working on your own, it can be a pile of post-it notes that are stuck to your computer. When you are working in a team, it needs to be in a centralized space where everyone can access it and everyone can see it. These are statements on the left that I have absolutely said in various different situations. I am a big believer in this idea of a single source of truth. This can just be a folder that everyone has access to. It can be a document where things are recorded. There are more sophisticated things, but you shouldn't have to hunt around and be like, okay, the presentations are in the Google Drive. The PDFs are in over in OnePoint in SharePoint. My files are tracked in, or my tasks are tracked over in OneDrive or Planner, and things are there. Centralize it. Make sure everyone knows where it is. The more you centralize things, the easier it is for people to access. Some recommendations. For IMOD, we have SharePoint. Everyone can be taking use of that. It's got a ton of space for data. You could keep your data elsewhere, but having SharePoint as a centralized location for everyone using it is a great way to put it. Assign a role. Say it's somebody's job to look after this. Give them a chance to lead on that front. Task management. It can be as simple as keeping a running document that is that template that I showed you, that every time you have a new meeting, you add a new section and it's all in one place. That's a pretty low-tech version of doing it. You can use something like Trello or Basecamp or Microsoft Planner. Even Slack has this functionality. There are a ton of them out there. Monday.com, ClickUp. That gives you a chance to set a deadline. That gives you a chance to assign a person. That gives you a chance to connect files. I'm a big fan of learning these new platforms. I know not everybody is, but this is where talking about how those expectations are set early on is a great way. And you can put someone in charge. Put someone in charge of it. Give them a chance to lead. Give them a chance to do that. But what you have to do is if you put someone in charge, you have to follow their lead and assume it goes like that. Timelines. Having a centralized calendar, whether this is on, again, in a document or something more sophisticated, is essential. If folks are not going to be able to follow through and meet a deadline, communicate early. Set an expectation that you give people a week's notice. I'm going to have trouble doing this. That gives them a chance to solve the problem with you rather than you making a problem for them. They can say, great, let's get some help. Okay, this one can be pushed back. What do we need to do to help you with this? Versus sending them an email on the morning of saying, I didn't get this done, and leaving them in the lurch. So really defining those expectations early on and communicating when things are going to happen will help the whole team. There's this great article that talks about this idea of meeting hangovers. And they did this study where 90% of respondents experience these meeting hangovers. And basically, what this is that you feel demotivated after a meeting rather than saying, great, we got stuff done, we're going to move forward. And they did a study on looking at what you can do to prevent that. Don't have one person take up all the air in the room. So if you have someone in charge of your agenda, encourage that person to assign participation. So if you have 4 agenda items, try and have 4 different people leading those discussions. Don't just have one person. Really look at the way that you can build in participation from the whole team. Keep the guest list tight. Make sure that it's stakeholders and not just spectators. If someone is just sitting in meetings and not participating and doesn't have a role to participate, it's fine for them not to be there. If you've got mechanisms to keep people engaged, asynchronous ones, whether it's reports, whether it's these things, they can disappear for 2 months. You might only need them further down the line. And you're like, great, look, we want to free up your time. You're welcome to come. You're on the nice to have list. But if you can't make it, we will get in touch with you when you are a must have, and we will give you mechanisms to bring you up to speed. Focus on how you can make things action items. So instead of saying, oh, I want a quantum dot synthesis update, make the statement more along the lines of what are the critical risks of having us synthesize the quantum dots by May? And what does that look like? It means that people are then answering questions rather than just saying, well, I've been making things and bloody blah, blah, blah. Having an action item gives you a way to kind of move that forward. Keep to time. This is tough. This is where recognizing that there is a leader in charge of a meeting, they can bring it back on time and say, look, we've got 4 action items. They've got 10 minutes each. I'm going to be calling time when we move on. If we have a great discussion going, we will put that as an action item on the next meeting and we will move that forward. Be accountable. Assume that everyone is turning up to your meeting wanting to be engaged. So assign people tasks. If there are action items that don't have somebody and there's somebody in the room who doesn't have an action item, put their name next to it. Ask them if that's okay. They might say no. They might be like, yeah, great, I'm more involved than I was. They want to leave knowing what they're doing. The worst thing is essentially leaving a meeting being like, well, why was I there? I've got no action items. I've got nothing to do. There wasn't a good reason for me to be there. Even better, don't have the meeting. And I'll talk to this a little bit. I do love meetings, but if you have mechanisms for asynchronous communication, then you're better off doing that. Have a meeting when it's a last resort. What does it look like? I would anticipate that a lot of people in a research situation are constantly having an updated PowerPoint deck or Word document or some kind of thing where you are recording what you're doing. Make that available to people. There are definitely people who are so busy during the day that they want to catch up on this when they wake up early on a Saturday morning or can't sleep at a certain time and want to go and hunt out information. Give it to them. Have documents where they can be commenting, where they can be connecting. You could get most of your feedback from this kind of asynchronous mechanism. But there might then be an opportunity to say, oh, okay, here's an issue. We need to meet on this. We need to talk about it. I can't just write an answer here. There's some misunderstanding, and it's great to communicate. So instead of having a monthly meeting or a weekly meeting, have a mechanism where there's an agreement that everybody in the team is going to upload on Thursday night an update from that week. And it can be a couple of slides. Doesn't have to be a professionally done full set presentation. It can just literally be, this is what I've been up to. I'm having trouble with this reaction. I'm having trouble with this measurement. I need help on this. Even literally highlighting where you need help and where you need comment. And then having a meeting when you need to. You could book that time in the calendar of everybody, and the person who owns the meeting on Monday morning, if the meeting's on Wednesdays, could just send around saying, no meeting needed. Or here's what we need to have. And that way you kind of free yourself up and you only meet when you really can make the most out of it. So here is a short description, asynchronous. This could be reports. This could be an email report. Semi-synchronous. This is something like Slack or direct messaging. And then synchronous, which is where you really just sit down and meet and hash through an issue. This way, when you have a meeting, it's about a focused topic. There's an agenda. There's a reason to meet. And that means that it's easier for there to be clear, actionable tasks that can be productively addressed and can be produced from this. So think about what you can be doing in your teams to really, if you don't want to be meeting on such a regular basis, there are mechanisms to address this. Kind of the short form of this is, what would you rather be doing with your brain? Would you be over here on the left-hand side and saying, I want to store information about tasks. I've got 10 tasks and I need to have it all written down and I need to have it remembered and I need to have this stuff and I need to be stacking things in? Or would you actually like to be problem solving? So all of those tasks are stored somewhere that I can find. We've agreed on them. We're taking them forward. I know what the plan is. I want to devote my time to be thinking about how to solve problems rather than the big stack of tasks I've got. And this is where having that shared single source of information is super valuable in a team environment. These are the action items. You can kind of take this away as a crib sheet. This just summarizes what we've been looking at and what we're kind of taking forward on the team communications front. The real thing I'll highlight is that, be aware of your colleagues' cognitive strain. Make things as easy as you can. They'll think you're smarter. Next up, we're going to talk a little bit about building mentorship and networks. Hope to see you then.